The following program is made possible with support from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation.
Welcome to Science Goes to the Movies, a look at the stories of science and how they change our culture. I'm Heather Berlin.
And I'm Emily Rice, sitting in for Faith Saley, who is on a tour with her first book, Approval Junkie.
Today, we're going to talk about Deadpool. Ryan Reynolds plays Wade Wilson, a former Special Forces operative and mercenary who volunteers for the Weapon X project, only to be tortured by an evil scientist.
Why the fancy red suit, Mr. Poole?
Oh, that's because it's Christmas Day, Dopinder. And I'm after someone on my naughty list.
You're probably thinking, this was a superhero movie, but that guy in the suit just turned that other guy into a kebab. Surprise, this is a different kind of superhero story.
To tell it right, we gotta take you back before I squeezed into red spandex.
Mr. Wilson, you've recently been diagnosed with terminal cancer.
We can fight this.
What if I told you we can cure you and give you abilities most men only dream of?
I'd say that you sound like an infomercial, but not a good one, like Slap Chop, more shake weighty.
We're delighted to be joined by Christopher Mason, Associate Professor of Genetics at Weill Cornell Medicine. Welcome.
Thank you.
I've heard that you actually own Marvel Comics' February 1991 issue, number 98, called The New Mutants, which is where Deadpool actually makes his first appearance as a supervillain. Is that right?
Yes, and I got Deadpool #1, the very first issue where he had his own comic book, and so I was very excited. I'm a big fan of mutants, just love mutants in general. On my old genetics textbooks, I would put I Heart Mutants on the inside, so very excited when there was a new mutant that was appearing, yes.
Wow, so this is a lot. Is this one of the reasons why you got into genetics?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really excited about just seeing how a mutation in DNA manifests in different ways throughout our life, but also in comic books it manifests often as superpowers and really interesting manifestations of what could you do if your body had this extra trait or power. So I've always been a big fan of the X-Men and mutants in general. Yeah.
And in the movie Deadpool, changes to Wade Wilson's genetic code actually are a result of extreme stress. And in real life, you're studying changes to astronaut Scott Kelly's genetics, who just spent 340 days in orbit. What's happening in that study?
So we're trying to build a complete molecular portrait of what happens to the body during long-term space travel. So essentially looking at every piece of DNA or RNA and all the molecules that change at a really high resolution to prepare for even longer missions, say to Mars or even to other far-flung planets far away. It's NASA's first foray into really the genomics or the omics side of looking at what happens to the body in space. And it's my laboratory and 9 other laboratories that were chosen to sort of study this in a really high resolution over the course of space travel and then before and after as well.
So just like in Deadpool, can stress and other intense experiences actually change our genetics?
So definitely, stress really changes, essentially not only what can happen to how your genes get turned on and off, so you'll respond during stress, and you'll even notice this probably about yourself. If you're in a stressful situation, you can have adrenaline pumping through your system, cortisol levels will increase, you can feel your body more tense in stressful situations. And in space, you are floating around and in a different kind of stressful situation, even more stressful. A lot of it is physiological stress, where suddenly you have, fluids in parts of your body that you don't normally do. So basically the pressure in your brain pushes against your eyes, and then it actually can damage the eyes. And so this is stressful in a very different way. And so we're trying to understand what happens to the body, how does it respond, and what is maybe the potential long-term impacts of this kind of stress.
But you're a geneticist, so are you looking at what's called epigenetics? And can you explain the difference between genetics and epigenetics?
Yes, so I'm a lover of all molecules of DNA and RNA, so this would include genetics as well as the epigenetics. The difference is, genetics is really the book of life. And so, you have, for humans, we have a 3 billion letter book of life that is the instruction manual for making all of the cells in your body. So we all started out as one cell, and obviously we've become bigger since then, but all the instructions to make heart tissue, brain tissue, muscles, all the components of your body are all present in that first cell, the instructions. And the way you read those instructions is the epigenetics. So the genetics is the book, and the epigenetics is how you read the book and what pages you'll be using at different cells in your body at different times in your life. So really epigenetics is kind of the control system on top of what is the same set of instructions. And so it lets you turn things on, off very quickly, and also you can link it to aging and essentially to what cell type that you've become, a muscle, a heart, or brain cell. So we're looking for changes at the genetic level and the epigenetic level, and then also RNA, which is when those genes become active.
And on past shows, we've actually talked about fictional characters that have had different experiences of time. The Flash lives for more than 100 years because of his speed, and the characters in Interstellar experience time differently because of gravity. Did Scott Kelly gain any extra time by spending a year in space?
So the short answer is yes, relative to us on Earth, all of us. So we have a twin brother on Earth we're also studying, doing the same complete molecular portrait and profiling of what happens to the body as a control. But in space, he actually aged a fraction of a second less than all of us here on Earth, including his brother.
Really?
So I did the calculation once on the way to Houston on the flight because I was curious, and it's really only at maybe about 0.1 seconds, depending on orbital speed and altitude, maybe a little bit less. So we really think it's just a fraction of a second. He did also come back about 2 inches taller, but that got smushed back down quite quickly because gravity really will pull you down fast as soon as you're back on Earth. But he came back a little bit taller and a little bit younger after a year in space.
But what goes into that calculation? I mean, how do you figure that out, the time?
Well, it's based on Einstein's relativity, so it's a standard relativity equation, if there is such a thing. But it is just a calculation of what is his speed when he's in orbit and how close does he get towards the speed of light. So it's about 7.6 kilometers per second, or about 5 miles per second that he's moving. So very, very fast, and goes around the Earth every 90 minutes, basically. So he'd see, over a dozen sunrises and sunsets every day, basically. And he had this Instagram and Twitter feed. It was just posting beautiful picture after beautiful picture. And so you can still look at them all actually online. It's just sunset, 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 sunset again. And so it was quite beautiful to actually just watch, a guy tweeting in space, just saying, here's my sunset again, for the 12th time, 15th time today. And but that speed, so that about actually at several hundred kilometers above the Earth, at that speed and at that height, he was actually getting closer to the speed of light, closer than we are here on Earth.
In spite of his name, Deadpool is immortal. And interestingly, Marvel rates him as the most immortal of its characters because he can heal from anything.
If we could heal perfectly, would we be able to live forever?
Potentially, maybe, I guess I'd say. So there are some things that avoid this unstoppable march towards aging. So some stem cells in your, say, bone marrow, for example, replenish all of your blood supply. Your liver can even regenerate if you take a low bout. You can regenerate some of the cells. So there are both adult stem cells and embryonic stem cells that maintain a lot of these almost immortal characteristics.
We can discover the way to just constantly regenerate these cells that are, slowly sort of becoming
losing pieces of chromosomes.
losing pieces of DNA. But is aging just that? Is it the failure to regenerate and to heal?
To some degree, yes. It is. We know that the shrinkage of telomeres and the loss of regulation of essentially what fragments of DNA you're keeping intact. It can be, you can fix it. If you have, the telomeres at the ends, you can add an enzyme called telomerase that makes them longer, and that's actually what happens a lot of times in cancer cells. The reason they can divide so fast and so limitlessly, really, is because they have activated telomerase, this ability to maintain long telomeres, and they can keep dividing until it becomes a disease. So there are ways to actually do this, or even there's some lobsters, lobsters in general are known to have a lot of telomerase active in all of their adult tissues, which lets them live for a very long time. They generally only die because they can't molt again. And so there are some ways where you could potentially live longer if you activate some of those genes, but then you might get cancer. So it's a bit of it's a trade-off, I'd say.
How can we get some of these telomerase? It sounds like this is a kind of magical fountain of youth.
It to some degree is a fountain of youth, but you could, as long as you don't mind a higher risk of disease if something gets dysregulated, I guess. But it is what we know to some degree. The levers that would make cells regenerate endlessly. The only danger is you have to keep it in check so it doesn't happen and take over an organ or become a cancer.
The movie Deadpool managed to make severed limbs extremely funny. So why can't normal humans regrow limbs?
So yeah, some other organisms on Earth can regrow limbs, like starfish can actually, or sea stars can have part of their arms cut off, it grows right back, some salamanders, some worms, some types of cnidarians. So we know it can happen. It's just the problem with humans, there might be other problems with humans, but one of the problems is, the cells in your arm are what are called terminally differentiated. They've decided what they're going to be. And the only way you could do it would be to try and reset all of them to grow and remember what they need to do to become a hand. And so it's not impossible, because we know, for example, when you lose a lobe of your liver, it knows, again, somehow, it epigenetically knows to grow back to the right size and the right types of cells to replenish what you had lost. So there are ways already in the human body that you can replenish an organ. It's just that the hand, we haven't yet figured out how to do that. But I would say nothing's impossible, because we know that the cells have some degree of a memory, and you just have to get them to program it the right way, as we can see with other parts of the body.
So why the liver, for example? Why the liver and not a kidney or gallbladder?
So there's debates about this, but some of the simplest answer might be the liver is a relatively homogeneous tissue, whereas things like the kidney or even the hand have many, many more complicated layers and integrating nerves as well as muscles. But the short answer is we don't know. We haven't been able to really understand exactly why some organs regrow so easily, whereas others seem to be impossible. Some parts of the hippocampus, for example, seem to maybe have some regenerative ability, where you have some cycling of different neurons, whereas the brain was previously thought to be completely terminally differentiated, that nothing was happening in the brain. But there are some cells that seem to have some replacement that occurs. And so I think we're just starting to learn a lot of that.
They've actually discovered it's in the hippocampus and the olfactory bulb.
Oh,
you
yeah.
have some stem cells that are there that can migrate out throughout life, and
Yeah.
so therefore they can regenerate. So it's this whole idea of non-differentiation, that
Right.
you can get these new, regrowth, basically. So if we can just figure out how to store more of those stem cells in different parts of our body.
Then you could, in theory, grow them back, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is
That's
why
so cool.
I usually sleep in a bathtub full of stem cells.
Just hope that maybe
And
they'll.
it hasn't worked yet, but I'm definitely trying again.
It's a shame. Like the fact that we're so differentiated and so complex is also the fact that means that we have to die eventually. That's
So we could be a
interesting
big,
thought.
yeah, we could be a blob of undifferentiated
That's
cells
right,
and
that's
live
live
forever.
forever.
There's pros
Yeah,
and cons.
it's a little bit of a trade-off.
Well, some jellyfish, there's a kind of jellyfish called the Immortal Jellyfish that is basically a blob of cells that can change between sort of a more differentiated state versus more of a polyp state, and seemingly be immortal, because the cells continue
because
to
you
go
can
through
switch
different
back.
states between sort of a primary state versus differentiated. And so it is kind of an immortal jellyfish, but then you have to be a jellyfish blob floating around the ocean. So there's trade-offs to, I'd say. I think we won so far, the having brains and having this conversation, I guess, so far.
Well, in 2013, George Daly at Harvard Medical School, working with genetically engineered mice, discovered something he called Lin28A, but reporters called it the Wolverine gene. What's that gene, and do you think we're going to be regrowing limbs anytime soon?
So there are people trying to regrow entire organ systems or even artificial uteruses for child rearing, or there is a lot of work being done on artificial limbs, artificial organs. And that gene actually is similar to what was done when you reset the epigenetic marks in an embryo or in an egg or an oocyte. You reset all the marks and bring them back to an embryonic state. And so there's several genes that seem to have this kind of ability to reset some of the marks across the genome. And so we're just learning what are some of these correct tools or genes. In that case is one gene that allows you to reset the marks back to almost at age 0, so bring you back to where you started, which then lets you reprogram the cells. And so I think if we can find more of those levers, you could reset the cells in very particular parts of your body and then try and grow them back.
You know Aubrey de Grey's work? He believes that with the advances of technology, that humans born today could live for 1,000 years because the way technology is advancing. I mean, is there any kind of truth to that? Do you think we can be able to extend life within our lifetime?
So if we were to extend life, so I'm a fan of the science behind it, trying to figure things out, understand how cells get reset, reprogrammed, transdifferentiated. But I think if you look at, I think it'll be very hard, I guess. It will require us to probably literally re-engineer either the genome or for sure the epigenome, is how genes are turned on and off, in order for that to happen. I think if you look at how long people have lived, what we've shifted in the distribution of ages is that it's not that most people are living longer. A greater percentage of people aren't dying younger, is what, if you look at all ages in the past 100 years. And so to really push it out further, I think you'll have to either re-engineer the human genome. At the very least, you'll have to re-engineer the epigenome and change how things are turned on and off. And I think it's not impossible. It's something called transhumanism. There's a whole group of people who fantasize about having cybernetic arms or walking around with like octopus and tentacles. I cut mine off a while ago, so I didn't like them after a while. But there is even you could say a movement of people thinking about this and actively trying to work on it from a cultural and even cybernetic perspective, as well as from a scientific and even genetics and sort of engineering perspective.
Is this why people might freeze their bodies?
Yep. There's a lot of people freeze. I mean, even freezing stem
just
cells,
your head?
Freezing just the head. I think it's unlikely to work. But if you have someone who's who's going to be your heir, who doesn't mind your head in a freezer, and you've got a freezer. There's no harm, I guess, in that.
I think there have been worse heirlooms to pass on, but
So like that horrible dish, that one that might, but I don't think someone will be able to pop the head back out and say, oh, let's reboot the brain and make it happen. I think there's some ideas of what's called the singularity, or Ray Kurzweil thinking about that. A better idea might be to put your brain into a computer. I think that would be. They're both far-fetched ideas, but of which one I think I'd bet on. I think trying to put most of your brain into a computer might be easier than freezing it and then bringing it back up in 100 years and plugging it in. But you never know.
But it doesn't mean it'll be conscious. We
Right.
had a long discussion about that. But I don't think, even if you put it in a computer, it doesn't.
It's not this.
It might not be the same. It might not be you.
would you be the same person? Would you be the same person if your stem cells lived on? I mean, this is kind of because people sometimes have a moral debate about stem cells. Are stem cells already human? Is it okay to do research on them?
Right. Are they? I think we are more than our cells. Not necessarily even in a religious context, but I think if you if you replaced half of your cells with someone else's, where are you still you, or are you 50% you? Or if you replaced half your brain with someone else's brain, it becomes a bit of a philosophical question. But I think if you're not tethered to the idea of being your own cells, then you could be a collection, in theory, of any number of cells. And so I think that an identity is something constructed beyond your own DNA and your own cells.
So the thing about personhood and who we are, it's really a construct, as you alluded to, and it's made up of all of our memories, of all of our experiences. When we're born, we're actually born with many, many more connections. And then as we experience and grow and interact with the world, there's this pruning process where it kind of like differentiates what's important, what's not, and then creates stronger connections. And that's learning over time. So if you just took a brain and, regenerate it from scratch and it didn't contain experiences and memories and all that, you would be a new person. So it really depends on how this regrowth occurs. I mean, if it just regenerates and it's exactly the same connections as he had when he lost it, then perhaps. But if you're starting from stem cells and you're regrowing it the way kind of in the film when he regrew his hand and it started out like a baby hand and then regrew, if that happens with the brain and you devoid of all the experiences and the memories, you wouldn't be the same person.
So Heather, as a neuroscientist, would it be scientifically accurate to say that Deadpool is diagnosable?
Diagnosable. So, you can't really make armchair diagnoses in my field. That would be really looked down upon. But, I think there are a few things going on. What I found really interesting is there's actually this neurological condition. It's a German word. I'm going to try to pronounce it. Witzelsucht. And it really means addiction to wisecracking, basically. And it's really a diagnosis where if people have damage to their prefrontal cortex, one of the symptoms can be that they can't stop making jokes.
Wait! You may be wondering why the red suit. Well, that's so bad guys can't see me bleed. This guy's got the right idea. He wore the brown pants.
And they actually are looking at it as a certain type of dementia. People with frontal temporal dementia can have this symptom as well, and it might be an early marker. And it's jokes that are really annoying to other people, and they're not that even funny, but they just can't seem to stop doing it. So it can actually be a neurological symptom. So that was certainly one aspect of his behavior. I mean, he was a bit manic, even a bit narcissistic, I think, in the fact that, he wouldn't go see his girlfriend. He was too, ashamed because his face wasn't, he thought I'm only going to go back to her when I can figure out how to fix myself. So, there were certain aspects to him, but, he certainly wasn't normal.
Is anybody, though, sometimes? Especially not the superheroes. Deadpool's cells rejuvenate at a super accelerated rate, including the neurons in his brain. In the world of comic book characters, this super healing causes mental instability. If this super healing of neurons was viable in real life, what would happen to the brain?
So what might happen is this lack of pruning of the brain might be a problem and could even underlie the suspected disease in the movie, is that the inability to keep pruning has even been linked to schizophrenia, that if you don't do the pruning the right way, it can lead to disease later in life. And so if you really had a hyperactive, continually growing brain, that maybe was continually pruning all of its neurons, if that wasn't done at an equally accelerated rate, it's quite possible that you could imagine a mental illness arising from that. And we know that it underpins already some other neurological and neuropsychiatric disorders. So it's not impossible.
Yeah, I mean, it's not enough to just simply regenerate cells. You know, it's about how they're connected. It's about, and the pruning as well. But if you just have cells that are, you know, haphazard in the brain, it's just like with Alzheimer's, you can't just inject sort of new cells without having some way to guide them and show them how to rewire and how to connect in the right way. So yeah, if you have too many cells or they're connected in haphazard ways, it can certainly lead to different types of mental illness.
So there's two things going on. There's the strengthening of connections that are important that we talked about with the babies doing, but then there's also pruning where and so is that a thing where there's connections that shouldn't be there, and is that what mental illness is?
In a broad sense, yes. Like that, there's either too many connections or things that shouldn't be there that have been strengthened. It could be strengthened also in a pathological way that could, be like a focus on something, sort of like ADHD, or where there's intense focus, or even autism to some degree, with sort of repetitive motions and really a narrow, very focus on one subject or one activity or one motion. So it can either be not enough pruning or too much strengthening in one area and not others.
Wow.
And so it can, to some degree, happen.
In this movie, Wade Wilson enters the Weapon X project in the hope of curing his cancer. Is the extreme acceleration of cell growth that's actually Deadpool's healing ability any different from cancer?
To some degree, cancer is accelerated growth that has not been checked. And so you could imagine that they're related in the sense that cancer is a growth as well. But what may have also grown with his sort of Deadpool powers would be the acceleration of his immune system, which today we just call immunotherapy. So that you could actually, if you could accelerate the number of cells that could look around the body and scavenge and find cancer cells and pluck them and destroy them, that would be one way it's possible that the acceleration and the activation of that gene could potentially kill his cancer.
So acceleration can be good as long as it can be sort of modified or moderated, that the abnormal cells are kind of weeded out.
Yep. So as long as the acceleration is really functional, that it's not checked, it's not taking over an entire organ, and it's doing you good things. So the immune system can also be overactive and overgrown, and you can have an autoimmune disorder. And so that's another case where just having lots of it around, it can be good, but it could also lead to a disease all by itself. And so.
But cancer itself is accelerated growth. It's just accelerated growth of the wrong types of...
Accelerated growth of the wrong types of cells that are then also have a migratory ability, which is metastasis. And so cancer is itself a growth that has been unchecked. And so it is cells that have gone rogue and no longer listen to the cues of the cells around them or inside them. So they just do what they want and in theory can live and grow indefinitely.
Can you go back from being a cancer cell? It still has the same genetics in it, right? But
so this great question. The challenge, what we do now with cancer, is we either just try to kill all the cells, and you have a lot of sort of collateral damage, or other cells die along the way, or maybe have the immune system go and track down the cells with immunotherapy. But even there, the goal is just to kill the cells. So there are a few cases though where you can do some reprogramming of cells, because in some leukemias, for example, the problem is that most of the cells that you have too many of the undifferentiated cells. You have blood cells before they became the functional blood cells, then sort of semi-embryonic state almost. And so if you can just differentiate them, so APL is a type of leukemia that once you differentiate the cells, then the cancer is cured. So you didn't have to kill the cells, you just had to reprogram them to finish what they were supposed to do in terms of becoming a glob of a cell to a more specific type of cell. And so there are ways where you could get something out of a semi-immortal state and get it back to what it's supposed to be doing, and then you can cure the cancer that way.
So you're not really reversing, though. You're just kind of redirecting.
You're redirecting. Yeah, so that's more redirection or finishing what you started. But to take a really aggressive cancer cell and reprogram it back to be a happy-go-lucky, hanging out, functional cell, as far as I know, has not been done. And it's not impossible, though. You just have to figure out what to target, what to reprogram epigenetically. And so some of the ways you can do this are CRISPR-type systems. You actually target very specific loci in the genome and bring some of those epigenetic modifiers with them. So you can actually change both the DNA and also what it's wrapped around and try and change something back. But all these technologies are just 1 or 2 years old, and so we've just now been able to try and target them. So it's a new direction for research to start on.
But if you think
rethinking freezing my body.
If you think about the accelerated rate at which science and discoveries happen, CRISPR is a huge advancement, and now it's a tool that's used all over, and things like optogenetics, where there's just all these great new technologies that are taking off, and things are moving at an accelerated rate. I mean, if you go from the time of just discovering the double helix until everything that's been done,
not that long ago.
It's not that long, exactly. So I mean, in the next 50 years, what could happen? I always just hope I don't get hit by a bus or something. Live long enough to get to the point. Yeah, exactly. See what happens, or get to the point where we can regenerate, my crappy cells into good ones.
Well, what's CRISPR? Is CRISPR this acronym that I've seen in the news recently?
Yeah, so CRISPR is a system, and also combined with another enzyme called DCAS9, but it's clustered regulatory interspace palindromic repeats, and so it just means it's actually the immune system of a bacteria that has been discovered and realized that, wait, there's bacteria sometimes have their own version of immune system where they chop up viruses that have invaded them and keep track of them and then look for them again when they might get invaded again. So it is a very primitive immune system, but it also has a very specific way to guide towards a specific sequence of DNA. And so you can add what are called these guide RNAs that say, oh wait, I want to target this area of your DNA, and essentially guide the enzyme to this one spot and actually reprogram it.
So are we learning how to do something, we as scientists are learning how to do something that a bacterium already knows how to do?
Yes, effectively, yeah. We're trying, we're just catching up to that. But they've been here for billions of years, we've got a few million years, so we're just catching up, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. That's about all we have time for. Heather, thanks so much for having me. Chris, thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, pleasure to be here.
Don't forget to check us out on the web at cuny.tv under the Science tab, where you'll find past shows and additional content. And check out our free app to watch Science Goes to the Movies on your phone, tablet, and any other mobile device.
You guys have an app?
Yes.
Is there a Facebook page?
We have a Facebook page. We have an app. You can get the app for free in the Apple Store or Google Play. And like us on Facebook. It's a fun site.